Hey everyone, welcome. So glad you're here. I always look forward to doing these, and I've been looking forward to this one since before I sent the first email out. And it was great to see such a response come in. So I look forward to having a good crowd here. And I hope we don't have so many people that we can't get to all the questions, because there's always lots of questions when we talk about Social Security. But the goal tonight is very, very simple. I want to show you the 3 priorities that we use here in our practice when we're helping someone figure out when they should file for Social Security. And these are really simple and yet maybe a little bit complex at the same time. But these are some of the things that we don't often hear discussed. And Social Security can be a big and very, very important piece of your retirement income plan. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Devin. I'm a certified financial planner. I have been practicing now for over 2 decades. And for the last decade or so, I've been digging into Social Security and talking about how Social Security should integrate in with your full retirement plan. So looking at it kind of from the big picture. This is something that we talk about on the podcast. I talk about on the YouTube channel. I talk a lot about in the blogs that I run, where you can read my articles. But this is a really important piece here. And it's been interesting, this journey with me getting into Social Security, because, when I first got started in Social Security, I had a lot of my colleagues that would say things like, Devin, what are you doing? You're a financial advisor and you're here to help wealthy people. And wealthy people don't worry about Social Security. Quit focusing so much on Social Security. You're wasting your time. But I quickly found out that that wasn't true at all. In fact, I found out that, the most financially successful retirees that I worked with cared a lot about Social Security. They wanted to make sure that they made the right decision. And you know what? This makes sense too, right? Because if you save plenty, you're not dependent on the check from day one. So it's not as if you have to retire and file for benefits just so you can live. You have flexibility. And that's a beautiful thing, but that also gives you some choices. And that makes the decision even more important. So for people like you, the choice isn't just when can I file? It's when should I file? But I want to get the most strategic value out of this benefit. And all of that starts with one big question. And that is, what's your primary goal with Social Security? Because as far as I can tell, there's 3 priorities that should guide this decision for you. And depending on which one matters most to you, your ideal filing strategy is likely going to look a little different from someone who has a different priority. And so here are those 3 priorities. Number 1, protecting a surviving spouse. I get it. This one makes sense. When the top priority is providing for your spouse, you want to make sure that if something happens to you, your spouse is left with the highest possible benefit. That's an emotional decision, but it's also very strategic. And I absolutely think that a survivor benefit should factor into when you file, and it's something that you should consider. And then for others, the focus is on building a solid foundation of guaranteed income. You want to know that no matter what happens in the market or in the economy, a big portion of your income is going to be locked in for life. So for you, Social Security isn't just this other income stream or this other, thing coming from investments. It's a tool for stability. And then the third priority is, these people that say, hey, I want to get a full comprehensive plan that's going to connect Social Security with my withdrawal sequences, how my taxes work. And that includes Roth conversions and all these other moving pieces. And those people don't want to just make a good decision. They want to make the best decision based on all of those moving pieces in retirement. And, all 3 of these priorities often overlap. And we will typically find that people have, 2 or even all 3 of these priorities that we have to coordinate. But when we break these down one by one, that's going to help you figure out what the clearest path is forward. So first, let's start with the protecting a surviving spouse, and then we'll move on to maximizing your guaranteed income, and then coordinating Social Security with your full retirement plan. Now, some of these screens are going to be a little bit large, so with text and other things. So I'm going to drop off of the screen because I don't want my little text box or my little image box down here to obscure any of the information that we're going to have. But I am here in the background. Promise I'm not running a recording. I am going to be here. All right, perfect. So let's dive in first with protecting a surviving spouse. So there's a lot of technical details that we could get into. There's survivor's benefit, there's the widow's limit, and there's some other complexities that come in with survivor benefits. But at the core of this decision, it's really pretty straightforward. If one spouse was the higher earner, delaying their Social Security benefit can significantly increase the benefit left behind for their surviving spouse. That's because when one spouse passes away, the smaller benefit ends and the larger one remains. This isn't new information for most of you, but that's just to set the foundation here. So if your goal is to make sure that you aren't going to leave your spouse in a position where they don't have enough income because you had to file early, well, the very first piece of that is going to be, how much income will your surviving spouse need? Now, this isn't as straightforward as some people think it is. I've helped a lot of people after their spouse has passed away, and a lot of times it surprises them at how little those expenses go down. And based on what I've observed personally and what a lot of the data says is that on average, it still takes about 80% of the income that the household needed, when there was a couple there, when the spouse dies, to be able to sustain the surviving spouse. And this makes sense. If you think about it, one of the large expenses, which would be, your housing cost, whether that's rent, or if you're making a house payment, or even if your house is paid off, you still have all of the other things, right? Maintenance, property taxes, insurance, and that stuff is not going to go down just because a spouse passed away. And then there's some expenses that can actually go up. For example, if you pass away, your surviving spouse is going to have the remainder of that year in the married filing jointly bracket, and then they move to a single tax filer bracket. And that's not only for federal income taxes, but that's also going to be for the Medicare IRMA thresholds as well. So they could see both taxes increase, the federal income taxes plus capital gains and dividend tax, plus they could be paying higher Medicare taxes. So even though one Social Security check is going to disappear, it'll be the lower one, that doesn't mean that the income need is going to disappear with it. And so what I always recommend to people is that you need to set up two versions of your retirement budget. One for when you're both alive and one for when one of you are gone. Now, you can use my free retirement budget calculator to map this out. You'll see a QR code up in the top right-hand corner where you can access that. And that doesn't require you to put your email in or any of that. It's not tracked. We don't get any of those results. It's just a tool we had built for you to be able to go out and use to be able to get a good idea of what those expenses need to be. So you can use that calculator, or if you prefer something more simple, just write it down in a notepad, or if you like using Excel or Google Sheets, and just do two columns, one for when you are both still alive and one for if one of you are gone, and take a look at those numbers. It might surprise you how little those expenses change. So for example, we talked about federal income taxes possibly going up, and we've ran scenarios where that happens. We talked about IRMA, we talked about capital gains, dividends, other things that could go up. But there are some expenses that could go down as well. And this is going to be situational depending on the individual couple. So an example of that is we have a lot of clients who like to travel. But typically, one of those spouses likes to travel more than the other one, right? And some of you on the other side watching this, if you're the one who really doesn't like to travel, you're saying, yep, I know what that's like. Usually you have a spouse who's really passionate about it and the other spouse who just is more comfortable at home and that's where they like to stay. So if that spouse that likes to travel is the one that passes away, uh, that can be a significant expense that would, either shrink substantially or disappear entirely. But getting clear on these numbers is very, very important. And once you get clear on these numbers, there's a second piece to this, and that is it starts to tie in with that second priority where we are looking at maximizing guaranteed income, but it's still a little different, but it is going to tie in. Your filing decision is going to have a direct impact on your investment assets. And again, we'll go deeper into that later, but at a very high level, if you file early, you're likely going to take out less from your investment accounts in those early years. And, if you wait to file till later, you're going to need to draw more from those accounts before Social Security starts. So the Social Security decision directly affects the balance between guaranteed income and investment assets. And sometimes this decision about, do I want to leave a higher investment portfolio or a higher guaranteed income stream, is about just making life easier for the surviving spouse. In a lot of households that we help, there's one person who handles the planning, tracking the investments, making the tax decisions, and that's all the same person in many cases. So if that's you and something happened to you, would you feel comfortable leaving your spouse a larger portfolio to manage or a higher guaranteed monthly benefit that just shows up automatically? So that's something you have to think through, right? The portfolio obviously is going to require some ongoing decisions like the allocation, withdrawals, tax decisions, things like that. And the other is just a simple deposit into the bank account every month. And, for some people, having that kind of simplicity is really valuable because it can reduce stress. And, it's already going to be a difficult season of life, and reducing some complex financial decisions in that period can be a good thing. And that's why I do see that, for people that are good savers, even, they will choose to maximize Social Security just so their surviving spouse can have a higher guaranteed income stream, not because they need the money and they need the extra income, but because it makes the survivor's life more trouble-free. And that starts to tie directly into the next priority, which sounds a lot like this, but it's a little different too. And that's maximizing guaranteed income. Some people want certainty, and I get that. We all kind of crave certainty at a certain level. But when some people get into retirement, they want to know that they have a guaranteed income floor in retirement. And for many people, this guaranteed income floor is for covering their essentials, like their housing, their groceries, their utilities, and their healthcare expenses. And it doesn't matter what happens in the market, what happens with the interest rates. They know that they can keep the lights on and keep food on the table and stay in their house with all their guaranteed income sources. And then their discretionary expenses like travel, gifts, or hobbies can then be funded from their savings. And not everybody draws this hard line between essential and discretionary spending, but a lot of people do like the idea of maximizing income from guaranteed sources because it's a predictable, reliable income that, helps them to have some peace of mind that makes life and retirement, which is not supposed to be stressful, by the way, but it is for a lot of people. And having a higher guaranteed income floor can make retirement feel a little less stressful. So if that's your priority, the answer is really pretty simple there. Wait to file. That doesn't mean the decision is automatic, right? Or that you shouldn't dig a little deeper and look at some of the other priorities. But if you're purely thinking about guaranteed income, Social Security is one of the best tools that you have. In 95% of the people I talk to, Social Security benefits are the highest recurring income stream that they have. Occasionally, I'll still talk to someone with a high pension, but generally Social Security is it. And, it's really a beautiful thing because it's not subject to sequence of returns risk. It's very stable. And I get why a lot of retirees are looking for that. And that brings us to our third priority, and that is thinking about your filing decision with the big picture in mind. This is often the priority that aligns everything that you're wanting from Social Security while also keeping an eye on how your filing strategy will affect your portfolio balances and your cumulative taxes that you'll pay in retirement. This is where it starts to get a little more strategic and deeper. You know, a lot of the Social Security planning that I've seen done is almost like an afterthought, where someone helps you think through your Roth conversions, withdrawal sequences, and the other pieces that have to move together. And then after all that's decided, you figure out what to do with Social Security. But there is a way to take a disjointed strategy and make it a cohesive strategy, right? Where everything is going to work together. So let me show you a case study about a couple that we did a plan for. So after talking through their priorities with Social Security, they decided that for them, they wanted a plan that did not overemphasize any specific area. And they were most concerned with making sure that their Social Security strategy fit within their total comprehensive plan. Now, their secondary strategy was making sure the surviving spouse was taken care of. And then for them, it was a distant last place was maximizing their guaranteed income stream. So they were both 62, and they wanted to have $10,000 per month in net spendable income. So that's income from all sources, their pension, Social Security, distributions from the portfolios, anything else that was coming in. They wanted $10,000 a month after taxes to be hitting their bank account that they could spend on both their essential needs and their discretionary spending. Now, for income, one spouse had a Social Security benefit of $3,300, and the other spouse had a Social Security benefit of $2,200. Now, both of these were their full retirement age benefits too. So when we get into some of the charts a little bit later, you'll see how those were reduced or increased based on their filing age. And then there was also a pension where he had a pension from an old job that was $900 a month. Now, for savings, they had $1.9 million in their pre-tax account. That was a combination of IRAs and a little bit left in a 401k. There was a $400,000 taxable brokerage account that was just a joint account. And then they had $75,000 in a Roth IRA. So we looked at a lot of different strategies, but we narrowed these down and we looked at the broad filing ages of filing at 62, filing at 70, and the split strategy, where one spouse with a lower benefit files at 62 and the spouse with a higher benefit files at 70. And that last strategy is one of those you see as one of those big rules of thumb that we often see in a lot of the financial media that's out there as being the best strategy. Now, when we look at these strategies, we want to look at this in the lens of how do the filing strategies affect portfolio balances and cumulative taxes? Because those are the two ways that we can put different scenarios side by side to make some decisions about how we feel about those scenarios, right? And, anytime we are modeling out the future, we have to be very careful with rates of return because both the stock and fixed income markets can be messy, right? And that's a rabbit trail that I could go down, but don't think that just because you have bonds, they're not going to decline. We could get into talking about the spending bucket, how to build that spending bucket. And with volatility like we saw today, I think that's really important to talk about, but that's a separate topic. I don't want to get into that too much. But you have to build your plan to be able to withstand some of the shocks that happen in the market. And I'll show you how this ties into Social Security here in just a moment. So, for example, just in the last 25 years, we've had two big bear markets. After the dot-com bubble burst, the market went down 49% from its peak. Then just a few years later, in the financial crisis, the market went down 57% from its peak. And when I say the market, I'm talking about the S&P 500. So this isn't ancient history that we're looking at here. It's within the memory of probably everyone who's watching this. And I do think that it's important to be prepared for this when we are planning. Now, if we look at the market over or since 2000, for some reason, this cut off the last part of my chart. I'm not sure why. But we do know that the average has been about 6.25%. All right. And that's the rate of return that we're going to use when we're looking at how some of this would have worked out. Now, some people say, hang on, Devin, I don't think 6.25% is a conservative return for retirement planning. You know what? I agree with that. You know, in our initial plans, we often use 5%. But here's the thing. Once someone has tested their plan under low returns and they see that, okay, I'm not going to run out of money, I'm going to be okay, I think it's time to test higher returns, because that can have not only a big impact on the balances, but the overall tax strategy that you choose. So in this case, these are projections that we built based on an average of 6.25%. Now, let me show you how this ties into Social Security. So first, let's look at the different filing strategies. And remember, there's 3 we're looking at: filing at 62, filing at 70, and then split filing. And I want to look first at the balances. So right up front, we can see how their balances increased for filing at 70. Now, would this have actually happened in the real world? I don't know if this is the way it'll play out or not. They may increase their spending, right? There's a lot of other variables that could come in. Plus, we're using linear returns. We know that the market doesn't work on an average basis, but when we're looking at cash flow planning, we have to use an average return. But when we compare filing at 70 versus the split filing strategy, you can see that that split filing, you know, that's where the lower earner files at 62 and the higher earner files at 70. You can see that that split filing resulted in a higher portfolio balance all the way out to about age 90, right? And then it dipped just moderately under that. Now, when we bring in filing at 62, and this is both of them filing at 62, that's that dark green line at the top. This was even more powerful for helping them preserve their portfolio balance. And this also gave them a higher balance into their 90s, like the split strategy, but the portfolio balance for filing at 62 was a lot higher for many of those years. And for some people, having that assurance that, hey, if we get into a bad market and I start with a higher balance, I'll be in a better position to recover. That kind of assurance is valuable. So what we looked at there was the perfect example that if you retire before 70, you have to acknowledge that both sides of this scale cannot move in the same direction. If you decide to wait about filing for Social Security, you're going to have to take larger distributions from your savings, unless you've got some other kind of arrangement that most people don't have. So this means that by maximizing Social Security, by waiting, you're also making a decision to minimize your retirement savings. And the inverse also holds true, where, you know, if you decide to file early so you won't have to dig as deeply into your retirement savings, you're making a decision to minimize Social Security and thereby maximize your retirement savings. Now, we'll dig a little deeper into this in just a moment, but now let's look at how each of these filing strategies would have impacted their cumulative taxes. So we looked at portfolio balances. Now let's look at cumulative taxes. And this is interesting. First, we have the cumulative taxes they would have paid if they would have both filed at 70. And then we have the split strategy, which shows a lower cumulative tax, but not a lot. And then we have filing at 62. And the interesting part is that by filing at 62, their cumulative lifetime taxes would always be lower than the other strategies. So unlike the portfolio balances where there was an age where it kind of crossed over, cumulative taxes never crossed over. It stayed lower for the entirety. So when you compare both of them side by side, and I know this chart's hard to read, right? We've got 2 line graphs on one page, but when you look at filing at 62, again, those are the dark green lines. On top, you have cumulative taxes, and that line's on the bottom, right? That's where you want it. Lower cumulative taxes. And then the line on the top, or the balance line, you want that line on the top because you want higher balances. And so filing at 62 gave them a better experience in both cumulative taxes and portfolio balances. But why? Right? Why did this happen? Well, it comes down to withdrawal rates. This is simply the amount that they had to pull out of their investments as a percentage of their total. So let's look at filing at 70 first. You can see that early on, they would have had to take more out of their retirement savings because they didn't have Social Security to make up part of that $10,000 per month that they needed. So you can see that right in those first few years, they were pulling out between 4.5% and 6% every year from their accounts. And then once they filed for Social Security, you can see that at 70, how it drops, right? But the way that time value of money works is that when you're spending that money up front, it doesn't have, it really can't make that up. So, and a lot of that was because of the way that their portfolio or their retirement savings was structured, where they had the bulk of it in pre-tax accounts. But I'll have to say that is the vast majority of people that I talk to, where the bulk of their savings is in pre-tax accounts. And that's the reason why you saw the age 70 being higher on taxes as well, because right at the beginning, you've got a lot of taxable income coming out. And then if you look at the split strategy, that's the lighter green that's coming in next. Well, their distributions were in that 4% and then started to ease up close to the 5%. And then at 70, when the higher earner filed, those withdrawal rates went down some. And then we have the filing at 62. And that gave not only the lowest withdrawal rate of all of those, but it was the smoothest withdrawal rate as well. And that's the lowest in the beginning, because then you can see at 70 how the withdrawal rate for filing at 62 actually went up some. So this raises the big question. I've got to get a drink of water. Goodness. The big question this raises then is filing early better for most people? And I know it seems like I just made the case for that. But really what I'm wanting to make the case for is that no, there's no way that we can take just the data set that we just looked at and imply that filing early is best, because it's going to change based on your age. How many years between where you are now and Social Security do you need to pull money out of your retirement accounts? What's that income need going to be? How much do you have saved, and where? What account types do you have that saved in? But I do think that you can find the answer, but it's going to require a lot of testing. This is not something that you need to, look at briefly, make a decision and move on. You need to look at all the filing gauges and how they fit different withdrawal strategies. And if you're going to do Roth conversions, that's likely going to change it as well. You need to stress test your portfolio against negative market returns and early death of a spouse. And there's other factors in there too. Please do not just accept the plan that gives you the highest probability of success. I know a lot of these financial planning softwares, retirement planning software, just has these probability of success meters and will give you this number, but you cannot just take what it's telling you, because they are measuring one thing, and that is which plan has the highest balance on the last day of your life. And that's not what retirement is all about. And also, don't just accept the word of your financial planner or your tax advisor, because I can tell you this too, no one is going to feel the pain of retirement mistakes like you will. But if you look at enough data that's clear and it's easy to understand, you can find a strategy that has the right balance that works for you and your family. And I'd be very cautious about hyper-focusing on just one priority, because I think it can lead to blind spots, right? So whether that priority is maximizing Social Security, which thankfully is starting to die off in some of the financial media that's out there, or that priority is increasing survivor benefits or preserving guaranteed income, I don't want to get someone that just hyper focuses on one of those priorities and files based on that and that alone. I think that in most cases, the best filing strategy is the one that fits the whole plan. And you can get there. You can figure that out. It might take a little work, but it's going to be worth it. So if there's one big takeaway here, it's get a plan that will give you clarity. Your plan shouldn't be overly simplistic. It's absolutely going to have a lot of moving parts, but it should not be 80 pages and filled with fluff. That's something that I rail against quite often, are the big, long plans that have your name printed on them and say nothing inside. I do think that your plan should be very, very, very clear. Because I can tell you, from the last couple of decades that I've walked this road with people like you, is that if you don't have clarity, you're not going to have confidence. I or no other financial planner can have that confidence for you. And that pat on the back with someone else telling you, hey, you're going to be okay, don't worry about it. That's probably not going to be enough when the market gets rough or life throws you some kind of other curveballs. I don't think you can afford, if you're getting ready to retire and you haven't made this decision yet, I don't think you need to go any further without complete 100% confidence that your strategy is going to work. And that doesn't mean that you hire me or any other financial planner to tell you exactly what you should do. But I'm a big believer that, financial planning, and especially retirement planning, is one half data and one half emotions. It ultimately, you have to look at a plan that has real data, that it's presented clearly, and then determine how you feel about that data. You need to see multiple scenarios. And this is the only way you can get the retirement confidence you need. And I promise that if you look at enough scenarios that have the right assumptions built in, you're going to find one that resonates with you. And, if you've been trying to piece this together on your own, you've probably felt that tension of, well, I don't know what I don't know. And I hear that all the time. And it's, I think, a sign of intelligence from people when they can admit that. Even people who are comfortable using tools like Bolden tell me that, in the back of my mind, I just wonder if I've missed something. Ultimately, most retirement mistakes don't happen because someone picked 62 instead of 70. It happens because the decision was never tested inside the whole plan. And that's why we offer a retirement clarity meeting, where we take your scenario and we talk about how the big puzzle pieces may fit together. We look at your filing ages, how each option could affect withdrawals, cumulative taxes, and long-term portfolio balances. And I can tell you this meeting is not a sales call. If anyone in here has done one of these calls, they'll tell you there's never a point in this call where you feel a little bit of arm twisting. That doesn't happen. It's about stepping back and looking at your specific situation. So your Social Security, your taxes, your withdrawals, your portfolio, and trying to see if we can fit those puzzle pieces together in a way that may be a little smarter. So if that's something you'd value, there's a QR code on the screen. You can scan that and you can book a time directly on my calendar. And you'll be talking to me, not one of my other advisors. And again, you're not committing to anything behind the conversation here. The goal is really simple. I want to give you clarity on how your Social Security decision and all the other things may fit together. Because, we've got to be straightforward about this. You're only going to retire once. Most people, anyway. And it is absolutely 100% worth getting this right. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions. And for the questions here in just a moment, once I get a couple of tech things worked out, I'm going to come back on the screen, but you'll see this QR code for a retirement clarity meeting coming up at the top of the screen as well. So let me see. I'll let a few questions come in while I figure out some of the tech stuff on this side. There we go. That worked out pretty nicely, I think. All right. So let me get this up. Oh, not what I intended to do. Move that right here. All right. Let's go back up here to the top. And I do have my glasses on. People say, Devin, there's an awful glare on your glasses. Well, I haven't figured that out yet. But without my glasses, I can't read. Okay, I've seen this a couple of times. Should we plan on reductions in 2034 when projecting income? No. I think some people should. I do think the changes to Social Security are going to be age-based and not income-based, right? The Social Security Administration has a long track record of gradually phasing in changes. And I think any changes that we're going to see will also be phased in. And I don't think that anyone who is close to receiving benefits now, if you're 55 plus right now, I don't think you're going to have any issues with being able to collect the full Social Security benefit that you've been promised. It's just too big of a voter block for them to mess around with. So no, I wouldn't. Now, if you're less than 55, I think there's some conversations that, you should probably have, because I do think there's going to be some challenges there and some changes. I don't think the system's going to look the same for people that's under 55 as it does for people that are over 55. Okay. All right. So I'm 66 and my wife is a lower earner at 64. I'm thinking of waiting until 70 to file. Does she need to wait until 67 to maximize survivor benefits? Okay. I get the question here. No, she does not. So the survivor benefit and your own retirement benefits are two independent benefits. So for example, if she was receiving, say, $1,900 on her own, and you're receiving $4,000 in your own benefit and you die, then her benefit would simply stop and she would start collecting the amount that you were collecting on the day that you died. Now, if she's not yet full retirement age at that point, it would be reduced, but she could continue to collect her own benefit up until her full retirement age and then simply switch. So survivor benefits are one of those benefit types that allow people to do those switching strategies that's still in there. And that may or may not make sense. And those numbers may not be, close to what yours are, but no, by her filing for her own benefit, she doesn't permanently reduce the amount of survivor benefits that she's going to be entitled to later, for sure. All right. Phil said, I'm 75 years old, started receiving full benefits at full retirement age. Will this seminar help me in any way? I don't know. I didn't read the entirety of that question before I put it up there, but Phil, I hope you got something out of it, for sure. The most common mistake people make with Social Security, it depends on if they are before full retirement age or, if they before benefits or after, before they file. Checking your earnings record, I think, is one of the big ones. There are mistakes there. I've heard a lot of people talk about mistakes there. We've helped some people fix mistakes in their earnings record. So it is absolutely something that I would. After that is just not being strategic. Once you're getting ready to file and your benefits kind of set, it's just not being strategic with how you file and just filing because it's available. Okay. Let's see. All right. Higher earner is 6 years younger. What do we need to consider when determining if older delays, younger delays, or we both delay? It's always an interesting case when we have the higher earner that's younger. Because what generally happens is that you will already have, well, I mean, this is the perfect case here. So by the time the higher earner is eligible for benefits at 62, the lower earner will be 68, roughly speaking, right? And so depending on how much lower earning the lower earner spouse had, all of their benefit could be coming from a spousal benefit. So you need to look at the calculation of, okay, if the higher earner, who is younger, is going to be driving up their own benefit, one of the trade-offs of doing that is they're also stepping over a spousal benefit for every month that ticks by. And it would be a full spousal benefit because higher earner files at 62. If the lower earner is already full retirement age, they would be collecting the full retirement benefit, which would be 1/2 of the higher earner's full retirement age benefit. So you've just got to do the calculation there. And that's relatively easy in Excel or just using a notepad. If you apply some inflation to it, you can figure out for sure. Let's see. Eileen said, spouse A is higher earner, collecting the benefit. Could the lower earner, spouse B, age 66, file early? Yes, absolutely. Yep. The survivor benefit, again, is an independent benefit. You do not have to be, by filing for your own benefit, you are not precluding yourself from being able to get the full survivor benefit. And Laura said, I waited until 70 and I'm glad I did. I was able to work that long and I'm still working. You know, I don't follow too many rules of thumb because I like to test everything. And I find that when I apply testing and data to a lot of the rules of thumb, they just don't really hold up. One of the ones that generally does hold up, though, is if you're still working, there's only a couple of cases where it makes sense to file for Social Security, right? I have found that in just about every case, you need to wait until after you retire to file for Social Security until you need the income. Otherwise, it just is not going to make mathematical sense. I haven't found a case yet. I mean, there are some outliers, right? If you have minor children or disabled children at home, that's certainly one of them. Let's see. Somebody said, was the spousal benefit part of the original Social Security blueprint? No, it was not. There were no spousal benefits. And interestingly enough, when spousal benefits were introduced, it was only for women. They did not add spousal benefits for men, I believe, until the amendments in the 1950s. And I can't remember what year they added spousal benefits to it. It was fairly early on in Social Security history, maybe the early 40s. It could have even been the late 1930s. I don't remember exactly when. Let's see. Oh, somebody answered that here. They said, according to Google, the spouse benefit was an amendment to Social Security in 1939. How about that? Well, now we know. Thank you, Penelope. Let me get my words out right. Let's see. And we've already touched on this, but factoring in the trust fund being depleted, again, I really don't think it's going to be an issue for people that are close to filing. I just don't. So we are, and again, most of the retirement planning that we are doing is people that It's either 2 to 3 years away from full retirement, or they have just retired. If you were closer to retirement or further away, you might want to apply some discounts to that. But yeah, I'm not discounting it unless you're under 55. And Paul made an interesting point here. Social Security isn't truly taxed, because I think someone else earlier said something about taxed, is that they are reducing your payment by the corresponding amount. And that's an interesting way to look at it. Frankly, it's the way that I look at it too, that taxes on Social Security really are just a means test. If your income goes over certain amounts, then they withhold a certain amount of your benefits, and those benefits stay in the trust fund. The mechanism that they use to apply that means test is simply the IRS when you file your tax return. So yeah, that is absolutely right. And then Ted said benefits will never be cut. Increased taxes at the 11th hour. Look at history. The last time we got close to a benefit cut, I mean, we were within days of having benefit cuts. And, they came out with new legislation. I hope they don't let it get that close this time. But if history is our guide, it will be, into the year 2033. All right. Somebody said, where are RMDs? And Mark, I'm going to assume that you were talking about in the charts showing the balances, and those are calculated in. Those are charts that we create directly out of our financial planning software. And so you've got, and I believe that was a couple in Florida. So there was no state income tax, but that did include federal income tax, and in some years, IRMA surcharges as well. So all of those distributions there was a lot of things baked into that I didn't get into, but yeah, RMDs were certainly included. All right. George Manning said, consider posting a link to the Clarity meeting in addition to the QR code. I did, but it's not in text that really stands out, but you can see it there right under the words Retirement Clarity Meeting. You'll see it there. It says caroladvisory.com/contact. Because I know the QR code doesn't work real well for too many people. The reason that I put a QR code in there, and this was surprising to me. So I have found and I don't watch much TV at all, but I have found that when I turn the TV on, I generally go to the YouTube app and I watch YouTube videos on the TV. Well, I guess I thought I was the only one that did that, right? And I saw a study that came out that said that around 40% of all YouTube videos are now consumed on a TV. Well, on a TV, if I say there's a link down in the description, well, guess what? It's really hard to find that description if you're watching a video on a TV. So that's why we started including a QR code on a lot of these. Okay. Let's see if we can unravel this from Scott. If the lower earning spouse is already collecting and the higher earning spouse is not collecting yet, and the higher earning spouse dies, how do the survivor benefits work in that case? So it's the benefit that they would have collected on their date of death. And that would include if they haven't filed yet, it would be their full retirement age benefit or the benefit they were collecting on date of death, if it also included delayed retirement credits. And then the lower earning spouse, if they are under full retirement age and they switch to a survivor benefit, that would be reduced based on their filing age. And July 4th said, I am happy with my decision. That's awesome. And the split strategy. Do you find the split should always be 70-62? or there are cases where it might be 68-62 or 67-62. And I can't help but notice your profile picture. 2 yellow labs. I absolutely love labs. Those are cute dogs. Yes, it absolutely could be. And a lot of that's going to be borne out in the testing and figuring out, especially if you have, now you can get into an endless amount of combinations and get complete paralysis by analysis. But it's especially helpful if you're looking at scenarios where you have a year with higher expenses. That's when you want to start testing some different split strategies. Otherwise, I mean, you're really, really splitting hairs. And those charts that we were looking at, you can't even tell the difference hardly. If you look at a 62 versus 70, and then say you take it and go, well, let's look at 63 versus 69. It doesn't even hardly show up. But if you're going to have an expense that comes out, then it could absolutely start to make sense from a tax and a balance perspective in that time. And that's another reason why I think it's really important when you're building a plan to make sure that you are modeling out those expenses. Okay, let me take a peek at something here. Oh. And let me see, how are we doing on time? Okay. Okay. Jeff said 65 in July. Hard to decide if I should start it then or wait until 67. It's a tough decision. You just need to look at the data. No question. X Factor says, is there a scenario where both spouses wait until 70? It could be. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And in this case, you have, both of you were high income earners. And so, yeah, it could absolutely make sense for both of you to delay, for sure, especially for prioritizing, getting a large amount of your income from guaranteed income sources. The survivor benefit isn't going to be that big of a difference, because if you're looking at the max benefit for you at 70, and then hers is going to be 4,000 at 70 with some inflationary differences, there's still not a huge difference between those benefit amounts. So survivor benefits aren't going to be a big deal, but getting a large amount of guaranteed income, and then not having a lot of portfolio distribution needs at 70 and beyond, that could be a big deal. All right, under the split strategy, how does that affect the spousal benefit down the road when the low earner is eligible for spousal? Is it reduced due to the early filing of the low earner? Yes and no. The spousal payment itself is not reduced, but you have to keep in mind that the spousal payment is made up of 2 pieces. It is the benefit from your own work record, and then enough to top you off and get you to 1/2 of the full retirement age benefit. So the lower earner, if they file early, their own benefit is going to be reduced, but and that spousal benefit will be too if they're eligible for it. But remember, you're not eligible for that until the higher earner files for their benefits. And I know that's complicated. And one of the reasons that I built the spousal benefit calculator, and if you just Google that, you'll see it. It should come up in the first 1 or 2 results. Is that is a complicated calculation for a lot of people to grasp, and I understand that completely. So I would go out there and use that if you want to be able to look at the spousal strategy. Let's see. Garan said, if I die at 63 before starting Social Security, what would be a base for surviving spouse benefits? So if that is for your spouse, because you're the one that's dying, the base is going to be your full retirement age benefit if you haven't filed. If you file, that becomes the base benefit. Let's see. Can the spouse take Social Security at 62 and then switch to spousal benefit at 70 at the 50% rate? Well, remember that spousal benefit is going to be a two-part benefit. And if you are eligible for a spousal benefit, when you file for your benefits, they're going to automatically pay that to you. Somebody said, what's the probability that Social Security will no longer be taxed? Well, I don't think it's very high. Now, if you believe what some of the politicians are saying, especially the current politicians, they're saying that Social Security is no longer being taxed. And I did a whole video on that, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but I just don't think that there is any room right now for cutting taxes on Social Security when the system is in trouble. Because that, if you look at the amount of funding that the system gets from Social Security, it's becoming a more significant piece for sure. Jody said, I'm 60, husband 61, and we have a disabled adult child in a private home because she doesn't qualify for anything else. Let me tell you, Jody, this becomes a very nuanced case. When you have a disabled adult child, the benefits that are available to them can be significant. In general, these DAC benefits, disabled adult child, are 50% of the higher earners' full retirement age benefit. So it's definitely something that you need to check into more. Do you think they will raise the full retirement age to deal with the trust fund? Absolutely do. I think the new full retirement age is going to be 70. Now, that's going to be part of a comprehensive overhaul program. They're not just going to roll that out on its own, I don't think. But I absolutely do think that we are going to see an increased full retirement age. No question about it. And, I plan to do a video on this where I show, if you look at some of the proposals that are out there and they show how it's going to increase, it's going to take a long time. One of the proposals that has the most steam right now, it's going to take 25 years to increase that full retirement age up to 70. So for people born in I think it was 80 or maybe 81 or later, their full retirement age will be 70. And for everyone else, it'll be between 67 and 70. But that's the way that they generally roll those out. The last time they rolled out a change to full retirement age, when it went from 65 to 67, they did that over a period of decades as well. And someone did verify that only wives were able to claim spousal benefits before 1950. Okay, so it was 1950. I knew it was in the 50s sometimes, but yeah, that was an interesting rule, the way that they rolled that out for men. Okay, let's see. When does the spouse not qualify for 50% of the husband's Social Security at the death of the husband? All right, so the survivor benefit is going to be equal to the benefit the deceased was already receiving if they had already filed. But then we've got the widow's limit that says that it can't be less than 82.5% of their full retirement age benefit. That really deserves its own webinar, talking about survivor benefits. And if they haven't filed, then it's going to be 100% of their full retirement age benefit, not 50. 50% is the spousal benefit. So that's when the higher earner is still alive then you're entitled to a benefit that's equal to up to 1/2 of the higher earner's benefit. Okay. Jeff said, wait to collect and do Roth conversions. Yes, maybe. Sometimes when you're doing Roth conversions, it's more advantageous to get the income that you need, at least a portion of it, from Social Security. But if you have enough in taxable accounts, it could be more advantageous to live off of those taxable accounts. It really depends on what that asset mixture looks like. And if my 62-year-old wife still has substantial deferred income coming in, can I start collecting it for retirement age? Yes, you can. And Fred, what you may be referencing here is the earnings limit. Just keep in mind that at full retirement age, the earnings limit no longer applies. And the earnings limit is an individual limit. So for example, if I retire at 62 and my wife is still making $1 million a year, I could collect my full Social Security benefit, well, reduced for my age 62, but I could collect that benefit and the earnings limit would not affect me just simply because she is earning. Now, it would affect hers if she decided to file, but that is an individual limit. But at full retirement age, that goes away. And Change Agent said, should the 70 strategy be considered a negative factor when factoring IRMAs, where staying 1 or 2 IRMA table levels lower would benefit? No, I don't think so. You know, in general, I think that IRMA is, I mean, I get that it makes really good topics, but I think that it is often overstated as well. IRMA is not as big of a deal as some people think that it is. So if I had the chance to get higher income, even if that caused my Medicare premium to go up, I'll bet that on a net basis, you're still going to be receiving more income. You know, I meet people all the time that don't want to do Roth conversions past a certain IRMA threshold. And, you know, when you look at the long-term nature of that, it generally doesn't make sense. Now, where we are really careful on IRMA thresholds is not unintentionally going over by $100 or $1,000 because it is a cliff bracket, right? If you go over $1, you get to pay that higher amount. But I don't think that it should be that much of a limiter when we're looking at this. Okay. Should the decision to take 65 versus later include application of the hold harmless? And does hold harmless even apply if you will always be in IRMA? All right. So the hold harmless agreement is simply that if Medicare premiums increase by more than your Social Security cost of living adjustment, your Social Security benefit cannot go down because of those higher Medicare premiums. And there's a couple of exclusions to that. One is you have to be collecting benefits. The other is you cannot be subject to the IRMA. And if you are, sorry, that can happen to you. So no, the hold harmless is not going to apply to you if you are subject to the IRMA. Okay, let's see what we have next. Elizabeth said, I followed you for 10 years. Good grief. You have watched me age. 56, ex-husband is 74 and high earner. My parents and paternal grandparents only live to 61 to 67 years old. Should I claim early? All right. So you have an interesting situation here. You're 56, your ex-husband is 74. So you're divorced. He is substantially older than you. If you guys were married for 10 years, then you could also be entitled to a survivor benefit. So you need to keep that in mind when you're coordinating this. Now, I know he's still alive, but it's certainly something to keep in mind because of your age difference. So for me to say that, yes, you should claim early, you know, you're 56, right? So you've got another 6 years. By that point, your ex-husband is going to be 80. And then you can start to make some of these decisions based on that. But I wouldn't set it and forget it right now. Absolutely not. All right. Husband and wife, same age, husband higher earner and still working. If wife takes her own benefit at 62, she's the lower earner. If husband takes his at 67, what does the wife increase to at 67? That is the perfect case example of why I built the spousal benefit calculator, because it allows you to put age, benefit amounts, and ages in where you're able to go in and look at that and model out exactly how that's going to change. So let me see if I can just pull this up real quick, because we've had multiple questions here on the spousal benefit. Let me just see if I can find it. Oh, I guess I need to use the right keyboard. Spousal benefit calculator. So let me share my screen. Okay, you should be seeing my screen now, where it has the spousal benefit calculator. So you can see that it allows you to put in the higher earner date of birth, the lower earner date of birth, the date the higher earner will file. And let me make sure I am actually showing this. I'm not. Okay, now I'm showing it. All right, so you should be able to see this on the screen now. But this, you put in the higher earner benefit, all of this, so on and so forth. You can put in the average cost of living adjustments. If you meet the qualifications for a divorce spouse benefit, you can select here. And it will break down the benefit. The benefit from the lower earner work, like in this example, is $1,200. Additional benefit from the spousal payment is $300, right? And that's based on the higher earner having a full retirement age benefit of $3,000. So you add those up, you get what? 1/2 of that. So it's going to tell you how much should come from each component of that. So it's a handy little calculator. I always recommend that people get out and use that. Let's see. If I pass before the start of Social Security, will my wife be entitled to my full retirement age amount? Or will she have to wait until her full retirement age? Well, both. She will be entitled to your full retirement age amount if she waits until her full retirement age. If she does not, then your full retirement age amount, which will be that base benefit, will be reduced based on her filing age. Should I take Social Security at 62 since I have minor kids, age 13 and 15? Matt, I can't say for sure, but almost every time when especially with having two, yeah, and then, a potential for child and care benefits on top of that. Now you're going to hit the family maximum lifetime or the family maximum benefit, but as the 15-year-old ages out, and you'll still have the 13-year-old there for a couple of more years. I mean, it absolutely could make sense. Yeah, so I would strongly encourage you to look at that, because it can make a lot of sense. Okay. Let's see. "61 and my wife is 58. As the breadwinner throughout our 35 years of marriage, I've secured for her 3 guaranteed income sources that are inflation adjusted." Awesome. That's very good. How does life insurance factor? Well, life insurance is, its original purpose certainly was to be an income replacement for someone who needs it, to keep someone from being impoverished because of your death. Now, it has more uses than that for sure. Not as many uses as some of the life insurance salesmen would have you believe, but it does have more uses. So, for example, we have used it in cases where people have taken a lump sum from a pension, um, because there's not going to be as much left in those guaranteed payments. So there's it's hard to say without more specifics on that, Michael, how life insurance may factor into that. Well, perfect. Well, guys, I think we were able to go and answer almost all of the questions. This was a lot of fun. I always enjoy doing these. Thank you for showing up. And I will be doing another one coming up very soon on the spending bucket. Look, if I had to find a time where something was important, it's right now with building a spending bucket. If you don't have one built for your retirement income, you're running the risk of having negative sequence of returns hit your retirement income, and that can be nasty. We can go back to these prior bear markets that we've had, not the short ones like COVID and the 2022, but some of the longer, more sustained bear markets. And without a spending bucket in place, things can get really nasty if you don't have a plan for it. And it's not just the potential harm it can do to your portfolio, it's the harm it can do to your peace. When you're retired, that's no time to be anxious. That's the time to enjoy your life. And when the markets get crazy, and they likely will, 1 or 2 times in your retirement, but you need to know that you've got some dry powder set aside. You've got that financial spare tire that you can pull out and you can, put on the car when you need to without having to worry about getting to town. So very good. Well, thank you guys again for showing up. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the evening, and I will see you here hopefully within the next 2 to 3 weeks where we're going to be talking about the spending bucket. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.